Hi, my name is Stephen Rabinowitz, and if we made it through this opening without buffering, we already have better production than the Jake Paul Mike Tyson fight from last Friday. We did it! The Sports Lines pre-Thanksgiving edition is on again. I'm Stephen Rabinowitz.
I'm Jay Kaplan, and so far uh, tonight, the Steelers are not living up to this. Here's hoping the fourth quarter goes their way.
I'm Anthony Strait. I'm just happy I watched the replay. I didn't try to watch it live like so many other people who was on
I
social
move,
media,
man.
just completely losing the shit over a 27-year-old beating up a 58-year-old man. I'm sorry, that was a disaster. I don't know what exactly was people expecting. But by the way, the Smith Serrano fight before was actually good. And I don't know what the hell the judges were seeing in that fight either. So all in all, a better night for boxing.
Boxing. Welcome to again the On the Sports Lines pre-Thanksgiving edition. So, if you miss college, just going to college, what the hell is wrong with you? Grow up. But for tonight, we have a college-centric show before we carve the turkey a week from now. College football is in the home stretch. College basketball just got off the starting line. That is on the menu for tonight. But we're going to go from college backwards to sophomoric as we talk about our opener and the New York Jets. After a mid-season show where we talked about the Jets and their rapid collapse, I thought I was safe from talking about them again for at least a week or two. Think again. This week, the latest fall guy in the Jets organization was now former GM Joe Douglas, relieved of his duties a mere 6 games before a contract would have done that anyway. That's so Jets. With that and the rumors that by the way, Phil Savage is the interim general manager, hasn't been in GM since 2008. That's so Jets. With that and the rumors that Woody Johnson said in a meeting last week that he was going to consider benching Aaron Rodgers when the team was 2-2, might you? That's so Jets. Jets another week of Jetsness at Florham Park. We pile on, but Jay, this is a mess. There is no end in sight for this organization.
No, and to be honest, I'm not surprised that Douglas got fired, but just like with the firing of Robert Saleh, this is just the latest case of owner Woody Johnson and his ready, fire, aim, rash, reactionary style of ownership. He's another one of these owners who thinks he knows football and sticks his nose in, usually to make unilateral decisions without talking to the actual football people he hired. The Jets organization has only been stable in recent memory anyway. For the 4 years, he was Trump's ambassador to the UK, which left his brother Chris, the team's vice chairman, in charge. And it was actually Chris Johnson who hired Joe Douglas, and it was during those years that the football people were actually allowed to do their jobs. Woody Johnson is the epitome of an owner who goes from one extreme to the other in his pronouncements of his team, saying things like, this year's Jets had the most talented roster the franchise had assembled in his 25 years as owner, which was seemingly an endorsement of the work Douglas had done over the past few years. But multiple sources inside the organization viewed it as more of an endorsement of the roster that Johnson felt he built. He was the biggest proponent of getting Aaron Rodgers to come to Florham Park, believing that the future Hall of Fame quarterback was the missing piece to a Super Bowl contender. 2, according to sources, as the rabbi led off with, suggesting to the coaching staff that Rodgers should be benched after the Jets lost to the Broncos 10-9 on September 29th, feeling that the quarterback's performance was holding the Jets back in what was described as a contentious meeting between the Johnson brothers, other front office folk, including Douglas, and the coaching staff. The coaching staff and Douglas were so dumbfounded by the suggestion that one coach actually asked the owner if he was serious. And as Rabbi said, the season was only 4 games old at that point. And somehow they managed to talk Johnson out of it, explaining that benching a player like Rodgers so soon would embarrass the quarterback and would not go over well in the locker room. This is also an owner who overpaid to reunite Rodgers with wide receiver BFF Davante Adams for far more than any other team traded for top wide receivers at the deadline. Then told reporters the next day at the owners' meeting in Atlanta that, Quote, thinking is overrated. You have to look forward. We have to look forward to the game we're going to play each and every week and try to win all of them. You just have to go with your instinct, and that's the best thing to build a team, end quote. And he responded to a question about how salvageable the Jets season was, saying, quote, we're going to kick blank. You add the words after that. We're going to do really well. Makes you wonder what color the sky is in Woodyville. With one further evidence that he doesn't know how to read the temperature of his own team, he wanted the Jets to practice during their bye week, which, as you'd expect, did not go over well with some of the team's player leaders. Now, with things like this now coming out in the wake of Douglas being let go, you can understand why, according to sources, the now former GM was checked out and felt like a hostage, with Johnson being the reason that defensive end Bryce Huff wasn't given a new contract offer, and other players on the roster not being paid any new money. Douglas had a trade ready to go that would have sent wide receiver Allen Lazard and a day 2 draft pick to Denver for wide receiver Jerry Jeudy, which would have been a big upgrade at a position of need, but Johnson nixed it. Then there's the Hassan Reddick fiasco. We all originally laid the blame at Douglas's feet, but according to a league source, even though Douglas was warned by Reddick's representation that if the Jets weren't going to give Reddick the contract he was looking for, something the Eagles' free agent was very clear about, the Jets should hold off on the trade. But when Douglas figured that getting a pass rusher of Reddick's caliber for just the cost of a 2026 third-round pick was worth it, and they'd eventually get a contract done. However, according to team sources, Woody Johnson wasn't willing to give Reddick a new contract, which makes his whole public plea for Reddick to end his holdout and join the team more than a little disingenuous. Overall, Douglas has underperformed as a GM. No getting around that. Yes, the 2022 draft class was stellar, netting the Jets cornerback Sauce Gardner, wide receiver Garrett Wilson, defensive end Jermaine Johnson, and running back Breece Hall, all of whom are starters and key contributors, and the free agent signing of cornerback DJ Reed, along with waiver claims of defense, which got them defensive lineman John Franklin Myers and linebacker Quincy Williams, added other roster stalwarts at the time. But the 2020 and 2021 draft classes haven't panned out, with quarterback Zach Wilson being the most egregious failure. And Douglas never managing to build an offensive line that was even league average, let alone top flight. And the trade for Aaron Rodgers can be considered officially an unmitigated disaster, which, even though Johnson had a major hand in, still somewhat falls at the GM's feet. Now, Douglas never had a winning season, and his winning percentage is actually worse than both of his predecessors, Mike McCagnon and John Idzik, which on the surface would be grounds for dismissal. And I have long felt that if the Jets didn't at least make the playoffs this season with a healthy Aaron Rodgers under center, that Douglas, along with the coaching staff, would be gone. It's unfortunate that in his final season, Douglas wasn't actually allowed to do his job. He deserved better. But this is what happens when you work for an owner as mercurial and temperamental as Woody Johnson.
Go ahead, Evan.
Maybe it's just the New York water, but why is it that we just have teams that have owners that kind of circumvent the front office guys they hire? We see it for years with the Knicks and James Dolan, and the younger Yankee generation probably didn't realize how bad George Steinbrenner was, meddling in his day-to-day operations that hindered the Yankees in the late 80s, in the early 90s. There was a Peacock documentary about that as well.
What's the original? Go read the original Bronx Zoo novel. That too.
Yeah, that one too. Yeah, but Douglas didn't have a chance, and it was pretty obvious. And you felt like we watched this team at the end of the 2022 season that they were going in the right direction. I mean, the previous year it was just basically a rebuilding project. Then the draft class that they got with Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, rookies of the year on both sides of the football, respectively, and even the addition of Breece Hall, a playmaker on the backfield. You feel like, okay, to get the quarterback position shored up, maybe they're in the right direction. The trade for Aaron Rodgers, think about this, the Jets are 10-28 since they made that trade for Aaron Rodgers, and they've lost a head coach and now their general manager in the process. Think about this. They let Mike White leave for basically nothing, and then when Aaron Rodgers gets hurt, they had to go back to Zach Wilson, the guy that they pretty much was trying to jettison when they traded for Aaron Rodgers in the first place. It just I don't understand. Like the just this whole thing has been a complete utter disaster. Aaron Rodgers on the field has not played well either this season. The offensive line has not blocked for him. I've been to a couple of Jets games just this season alone
My
where
condolences.
the offensive, yeah, I mean, when the offensive line was just so atrocious that, hey, look, put Joe Montana, put anybody in the backfield, and they're not going to have enough time to throw the ball, let alone a 40-year-old Aaron Rodgers don't have the mobility of 2014 Aaron Rodgers. And also the defense hasn't really played up to par this season. I was at the game on Sunday when they played Indianapolis, and they couldn't hold a lead. And on that final drive, to a blown coverage downfield, and Anthony Richardson on both his touchdown runs look like Jerome Bettis. That just tells you the step back this team has done on the field, but off the field. I mean, hey, look, I don't just like you have an owner like Woody Johnson that just comes in and meddles, and he knows more about the football people that he's hired. We see this across the board in different sports. Hell, in the NFL, we talk about the Carolina Panthers in that situation with ownership not too long ago. This is a situation where the Jets just have to literally start over from scratch. I mean, Aaron Rodgers, it's just probably it's the last domino to fall in this equation. I mean, it's pretty much all certainty he's not going to be back next season, and the Jets are back to square one where it was basically 4 years ago after the 2020 season, and having to go back to the drawing board.
If you're an organization, by the way, Joe Douglas's tenure, there's only been one team who has been worse in that time, and that is the Carolina Panthers. The Jaguars have tied them in terms of record, but they have a playoff appearance, and the Jets don't. The Jets are just a disaster on a disaster on a disaster. So here is a very quick rebuilding plan to what this team needs to do for the future. Step one, you have to jettison Aaron Rodgers. He is a distraction to this team. Now, people have said, well, just treat Aaron Rodgers with no respect next year and be like, he's not going to be anything. I'm like, no. You're going to tell Aaron Rodgers to not go on Pat McAfee. You're going to tell Aaron Rodgers that he has to be silent. That's never going to happen. Get rid of him and get rid of the circus. Step two, start seeing what you can get for your young players. See what you can get with Breece Hall on the trade market. See what you can get with Sauce Gardner on the trade market. You can develop them as much as you want, but if you don't have anything around them, you're wasting their time. And so you need draft picks, and you need to rebuild your team. You do not need what you have right now. And step three, and this is the most important step of all, convince the president to get Woody Johnson his job back as the ambassador of England. We've talked a lot of times about owners and the way that people have stopped meddling. We talked about James Dolan before and his meddling ways over the years. There was a point, though, when he said, you know what? I know people that can actually do the job. Let me put Leon Rose in charge of this. Let me put my guys in charge of this. And you know what? I might take a step back for a second and not be there. I'm still a jerk, but I'm going to be a jerk without having too much control of day-to-day operations of the teams that I own. And it's worked out so far. You've seen playoffs in that area for a while. So just pray to God that Woody Johnson is sent back to England, and for the next 4 years, you can find a way to get your plan back to the way it is. It's simple as that, because sometimes owners are a little bit of a block towards the building block of a team getting back to relevancy. You might need that one domino to fall, and that one domino might need to be an ambassador again. So we'll see what happens. Okay, now let's go over to college football. Now that the college football rankings are not a figment of imagination anymore, they're real. And just 2 weeks from now, it's going to produce our first 12-team bracket, our first ever 12-team playoff bracket. I've got some things to say. Buckle up. When college football brought into the 12-team playoff, we thought, this is too good to be true. This is amazing. We have a true national champion coming, and more teams have a shot. And even though me doing bracketology over the last few weeks has been a dream of mine in November, leave me alone. Don't make fun of me. There has been one huge drawback. we truly don't know who's really good or not, and what definition to measure good by. The 1 and 2 teams in the college football playoff are going to be spared any wrath from me. Oregon and Ohio State have looked solid. They've looked otherworldly. And they have signature victories over top teams. Oregon at home against Ohio State, great game. Ohio State on the road against Penn State, not great game. But now, when we get to number 3, we have a little bit of trouble. Texas is number 3. Let's have some fun. While a one-loss team in a really competitive league like the SEC with a lot of two-loss teams sounds amazing, the fact that Texas is one loss at home against the team who is number 10 in the CFP, losing by 15, in two-loss Georgia, doesn't sound great in your mind. And then let's look at Texas's schedule. Wins over the creme de la creme. 2-8 Mississippi State. 5-5 Michigan. Sorry, Jay. 5-5 Oklahoma. 5-5 Florida, 5-5 Arkansas. That's more fives than a $5 footlong meal at Subway. Free inflation. Considering the 2 best wins on Texas's resume might be Colorado State and Vanderbilt, kind of alarming for a team who would be the 2 seed right now in a CFP playoff because they would have an automatic bid as a conference champion, as right now as a conference leader. Then you have Penn State. Said on our preview show that this was a prime position for Penn State. They lose the big game and end up with 1 or 2 losses every season because they take care of everyone else and don't break a sweat. And outside of win over Illinois, ding. What's the resume highlight? Win against, here it is again, 5-5 USC and OT? Sorry, Jay. Pass. 5-5 Wisconsin on the road? Double pass. Beating Purdue by 39, a JV school actually did beat Purdue on the way here in the last 5 minutes. Try again, Penn State. And now for the hardest one to pick at, and that's Indiana. This is going to be the best season of Indiana football ever, and I mean ever, in the history of mankind. But for a team that doesn't rank in the top 30 of either part of their offense, passing or rushing, the Hoosiers have this schedule. Western Illinois, Charlotte, Maryland, Northwestern, Michigan State, and 6-5. Yes, 6-5 Washington. It's 1 step better than 5-5. I know when Kurt Cignetti came from James Madison to Indiana, he said, I win, Google me. I did Google him. I was impressed, but then I Googled the schedule, and this is what came up. And sorry, this team plays Ohio State this week. And even a solid performance in defeat means that they only have 1 blemish. They won't even have to play another game this season. Yeah, they play Purdue on November 30th, but we talked about that beforehand, what that actually means. They won't have a Big Ten title game either because it will be Ohio State and Oregon, and they'll probably make the playoff as one of the 12 best teams. Oh, and by the way, I just don't like that fact at all that you can actually just make the playoff and just not have to worry after a few weeks. In fact, Joey Galloway on ESPN this week legitimately suggested Indiana sit their quarterback because there's no way they can miss the playoff and he might get injured. Stop it. Stop it now. That's what happens when you put too many Ohio State people around in panels. Okay. The point of this is, one of the panelists that I watched on the unfortunately soon to be canceled Around the Horn in 2025, Woody Page, always said, look at the schedule. So I did. Until this week, Indiana only has played one of the Big Ten's current top 8. Penn State has only played 3 of the current Big Ten top 10. Texas has only beaten one of the SEC's top 10. When you play 8 to 9 conference games a year, this is just not the way to determine any contenders or pretenders. You miss out on playing 7 teams a year in the SEC schedule, 8 teams a year in the Big Ten, 8 teams a year in the ACC. You miss out on 6 games a year in the Big 12. So here we go. I'm going to do just a few things to balance this out better. Number 1, 10 conference games this season. Nothing more, nothing less. Aw shucks, Alabama. The Citadel can't play you this year. Tough break, guys. And then the week before conference championship week, I'm making it a wild card round. No scheduled games. It's just 1 versus 2, or games that haven't happened yet this season. It's kind of like a wild card weekend. You'll get 2 weeks to prepare. Give me the standings 2 weeks out and match up teams against each other who haven't played during the season and who are close in the standings. There's your prove it game. You don't have to luck into it. Okay, let me just go on to the other side of the ball because I have to give my SEC bias in here. Current number 9 Ole Miss had to go to LSU in South Carolina and then host Georgia. Georgia, besides this Ole Miss game, had to go to Alabama, Texas, and host Tennessee. Alabama had also had to go to LSU and Tennessee and host South Carolina and Missouri. Tennessee might be on the outside looking in, and another one of those teams could be joining them, Texas A&M, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. I don't need the 12-team playoffs participants or rankings just determined on how your schedule breaks out when it gets determined literally a year before you actually play those games. All leagues aren't created equal, except the SEC, other than everyone else. Just kidding. Anyway, all I have to say is do better, NCAA. Do better. Thoughts?
Anthony, go ahead.
You know what? I'll go ahead. Now, see, I like my suggestion better. We should go full bachelor, bachelorette, and just hand out roses and just let the teams kind of introduce themselves to America and see why they should get a rose and move on to the next round. But maybe it's just me being very obsessed with reality TV as of late. But I'm looking at the Yes, I'm right. I'm an old school guy when it comes to reality TV.
Did you watch The Golden Bachelor, Anthony? Just admit you did.
Watch it. I'm gonna audition for it next time. Are you kidding me? I'm 41.
Can't be The Golden Bachelor. You're 40. Stop it.
I'm golden in personality. Leave me alone.
Yeah, get out.
All right.
Okay, look. All right. Okay, get quickly to my point. There are two things I noticed on this. Number one, the Notre Dame people the people who complain about Notre Dame, knock it off, okay? Yes, I get it. They're not in a conference, and all the chat about they should join the conference. Shut up, okay? They can't get no higher than fifth if they make the playoffs. So take down. Number two, none of the SEC teams. I got the bracket projections. If the playoffs are the end, there would be a SEC team that has a home game in this college football playoff, which is very interesting.
Be on the road, yeah.
Yeah, all three, Alabama, Georgia, and Ole Miss would be on the road in the first round. But also, here's another thing: the ACC is actually in a better position to get a bye than the Big 12, and that is a byproduct of BYU losing last week and dropping 8 spots from 4 to 12, just like that. SMU is a position that if they beat Miami, that gives them a top 10 win literally around the most important time, and it almost guarantees that an ACC team could get one of the 4 byes, but it makes it a lot harder for a winner of the Big 12 to even to win the conference and to try to get. It's almost like it's to the point where the Big 12 winner basically is going to be the only Big 12 team getting in, and the reward is basically a home game. And those are the two things that stand out to me. But the SEC, because we for so long it's been kind of under how the SEC has been the best conference, and we talked about for years about how the 14 playoff format tend to sometimes favor the bigger conferences, and the SEC always, for the most part, being the beneficiary of that. We've seen them have 1 and 1 team in a number of years. To kind of see that 3 teams will be on the road, rather than having a home game, that's kind of interesting takeaway from that I see in these latest rankings.
Well, one thing,
all that could change in the next couple of weeks.
Well, one thing that's actually interesting about that is the fact that the SEC has just been cannibalizing each other, as I mentioned, this whole entire year, which is why you have the seed of 2 lost teams. The other thing is the top 4 seeding has been very interesting to me, because I think for the longest time when we started this off, everybody thought it was going to be SEC, Big 10, Big 12, ACC in some particular order. The ACC looks like they're going to be fine unless Miami or SMU get another loss. But the fact that there was no Big 12 team that really stood out, and Boise State has been just kind of like working in that 11 and 12 position, that intrigues me going farther because honestly, you can make a case for either of those teams. And one more thing before we get to you, Jay. I think one thing I'm very interested in going forward is we saw Miami drop a big time after they lost their first game. I think when people saw BYU finally losing because they were on the edge for weeks, that Utah game was very iffy, and Utah has not been a good team this year, and they punished BYU in accordingly. So we'll see if Indiana ends up losing badly to Ohio State this week. I'm very interested to see what I wouldn't say punishment or what the effect will be going forward, because that's going to be a hole Indiana's not going to be able to get out of.
Yeah. Rabbi, I'm going to touch on two points that you raised in your rant. I, for the longest time now, have been bothered by the fact that the SEC late in the season interjects a cupcake game. It was Mercer this year for Bama, but like all of the SEC teams do it. And frankly, I think that needs to stop. I agree with you. If you're going to expand conferences to the size that you're making them, and you're not going to have divisions, then I'm sorry, you need to play more conference games. Because these teams, if you're going to open your season by scheduling FCS teams and directional schools as basically your version of exhibition games to kind of work the rust off and work the kinks out before you get into conference play, you're only going to play 12 regular season games. I'm sorry. You get 2 cupcakes to open your season to shake everything out, right into conference play, and it's 10 straight through the end of the season. Enough is enough. I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. I do think that this is what was going to happen when you make these conferences too big. You're going to run into a situation where you don't have the best teams playing all the best teams inside of the conferences. The other thing that, with the committee is, and this is something that I read in The Athletic, and it kind of turned a light bulb on over my head. It does seem that the committee this year seems more concerned at how many losses you have as opposed to how you got those losses. And we need to kind of stop referring to teams as a 1-loss team or a 2-loss team. Can we look at how many games they've won, how they won those games, and how they've acquitted themselves across the length and breadth of their resume? Call it the eye test or whatever you want to talk about. But as much as, I think Kirby Smart's rant is more white noise than anything else. The one thing I do agree with him on is I also can't get a handle on what actually the committee is using as benchmarks, or points of interest or points of resume that makes any sense to me. But we'll see what happens. This is the first year of the 12 team. Hopefully, things will get better as we move along. As far as the release this week goes in the rankings, I can't honestly say I'm surprised that we have the same top 5 2 weeks in a row with one SEC school sandwiched between 4 Big Ten teams. Oregon State at number 1, Ohio State stayed at number 2, Texas remained at 3, Penn State and Indiana rounding out the top 5. I am somewhat surprised that Boise State, my pick as the group of 5 team to make the field, came in at number 12, putting them in position to potentially get one of the 4 coveted first round buys. Though BYU losing to Kansas and Tennessee losing to Georgia, which put the Bulldogs back in the field at number 10, opened the door for Boise State to move up. Like you, Anthony, I am surprised that BYU fell that far. It was 8 spots from number 6 last week to 14 this week. They're still the highest ranked Big 12 team, which to a certain extent, I guess, is an indictment of the shape of the Big 12. And they'd make the field if they won the conference. But right now, that league is not getting much love from the committee overall. And it's not looking good for them to be anything other than a 1-bid league. And that bid may not get them a first round bye. I know we're going to talk about 3 big games with some major bracket implications in the next segment, but there's one that's flying under the radar that will be worth keeping an eye on, at least one eye on, as it could affect the group of five situation, as well as the situation of one big school without a conference affiliation, as number 19 Army takes on number 6 Notre Dame at Yankee Stadium on Saturday. The boys from Hudson High, as West Point is often sarcastically referred to, are the only other undefeated team in the top 25 at 9-0, and are already locked into the American Athletic Conference Championship game against number 22 Lane. But a win against the 9-1 Fighting Irish would not only be the biggest win by any G5 contender this season, it would bolster the Black Knights' chances of becoming one of the 5 highest ranked conference champions, despite having one of the weakest schedules in the country, depending on how things shake out at the top of the Big 12 with BYU, Colorado, Arizona State, and Iowa State. Notre Dame has won 8 straight since being upset by Northern Illinois, including a 51-14 victory over Navy last month that ended the Midshipmen's unbeaten run. But because the Golden Domers are an independent in football and thus have no conference title game to play to offset a late season loss, just their regular season finale against the underwhelming 5-5 USC Trojans, it's highly unlikely they'd remain in a 12-team field with 2 losses. So they need to win out to hold their place as the CFP's current number 8 seed. Have I told you guys how much I love that college football has some legitimate bracketology in the first season of the 12-team playoff? This is fun.
Okay, last little thing about bracketology before I move on. First of all, the fact that Navy and Army were undefeated for so long, and we could have had a possibility of them playing in the conference title game and then playing what would be, it's the most meaningful game in sports, but technically to the college football playoff, they would have a rematch the next week that would have been completely meaningless, is just so ironic to me, and is so 2024 football. But the fact that if Army wins, they could jump the possible Big 12 champion, which could be a team that we'll talk about in just a minute, is just bananas to me in every way, shape, or form. We knew there would be one big leagues, and we knew the Big 10 and SEC would dominate the 12-team playoff, and just seeing it in actual vision is just kind of funny. I thought this would bump up a lot of these leagues. It hasn't really done that. Let's move on. All right. In the next 9 days, there will be college football games that will determine the final college football playoff bracket. We're here to highlight them. And sorry, Michigan, Ohio State is not one of them. One of the most important games in the land, yes. Me excited about this one, not a chance. Anthony, start us off. What game in the final 2 weeks are you looking at?
Well, the game I'm looking at is this Saturday, taking place in Arrowhead. It's Colorado taking on the Kansas Jayhawks. The suddenly resurgent Kansas Jayhawks, after a 1-5 start, is trying to play their way back into bowl eligibility. Right now, sitting at 4-6, and coming off throwing a monkey wrench in the BYU's, at least for the moment, college football playoff aspirations. Obviously, we just talked about the last segment. Colorado, meantime, can actually win out, get into the Big 12 championship game, and if they win, could actually be the Big 12 champion going into the college football playoff.
It will be the Big 12 champion.
The only bid that's going to come out of that conference. If they win today and get a little help from outside, including losses from Arizona State, they clinch a spot in the Big 12 championship game. So clearly they got to take care of business on the field. If things break the right way elsewhere, they're in. But coming out to this game, it's going to come down to Shedeur Sanders against a stingy Kansas secondary that really slowed down BYU and shut them down in the second half last week. Sanders going for 3,200 yards, 27 touchdowns, and a combination with him and Travis Hunter, who's pretty much got the Heisman trophy all wrapped up at this point. 911 receiving yards to go with 9 touchdowns, and obviously 3 interceptions on the defensive side of the football. That 1-2 combination is going to be a big test for the Jayhawks and their secondary, particularly Kobe Bryant and Melo Dotson, who are aggressive, physical defensive backs, and should be an interesting matchup and how they slow down Travis Hunter respectively. the running game for Kansas is gonna be key because Colorado, while they've been better stopping the run this season compared to last year, they're still susceptible to giving up the big play. And obviously the Jayhawks playing pretty much at home in an NFL environment. They want to slow the game down, keep that explosive offense off the field as much as possible. And on the defensive side, pressure to Dora Sanders. They kind of give him flashbacks to him running for his dear life last season. But just look at just look at the job Deion Sanders has done with this program. Last year, they were probably the most overhyped 4-8 team we've seen in history.
You think?
But also they're 8-2 now, and they're 2 seasons removed from having one victory altogether. And also, I gotta read more into this. From what I understand, Deion Sanders recruited a 5-star quarterback next season. So at the very least, he's made the Buffaloes an appealing draw for graduates and transfer students. But more importantly, he's got this football program on the right track. At the very least, they're guaranteed a bowl game regardless. But the idea that in year 2 that they could possibly win out and give us an opportunity to get into the college football playoff, I think I don't think anyone saw this coming. Particularly when you think about how much of this program was in shambles when Sanders took over, and to see it now, it's going to be interesting because look, America's going to see just how good this team really is come Saturday, and if they're able to get to the Big 12 championship game, and see if they can play their way into the playoff.
As the conductor of the Deion Sanders train, choo choo, I do have to say that it's been amazing. Yes, the schedule has helped out a bunch, and their only real big ranked team game, Kansas State, they lost, and how they lost to Nebraska is now even more beyond me, seeing how Nebraska has played. But I think in the beginning of last season, they were losing these types of games, and it does show a little bit of maturity. And good Lord, Travis Hunter just is a freaking machine who I think has the definition of the basketball endless motor out there. He will play 100 plays if he can. I don't know if he'll do that in the pros, like he said he would as of today when he declared, I think, already. But we'll see how it happens. It'll be very interesting. Jay, what do you have your eye on?
Number 5, Indiana, 10-0 in the 10-0 overall,
Yes.
6-0 in the Big Ten. At number 2, Ohio State, 9-1 overall, 6-1 in the Big Ten. This coming Saturday at the Horseshoe in Columbus. Either way, this game will be a statement maker, though Indiana needs it more than Ohio State. The Hoosiers' strength of schedule, as Rabbi has talked about, is weak as hell. So beating the number 2 team in the nation on the road, especially as an 11.5-point underdog, would give them arguably their best win, the best win of any team in the country. It would make them one of no more than 3 undefeated teams in the country, including one in their own conference, Oregon, whose own win in Eugene over the Buckeyes was by a single point. The Ducks have clinched a spot in the Big Ten Conference title game, so this game could determine who their opponent is. A loss to the Buckeyes, who the Hoosiers haven't beaten since 1988, followed by what would be a very likely win over in-state rival Purdue to close out the regular season. And the Hoosiers would be 11-1 without anything that qualifies as a signature win, like over a ranked team, as well as not having any wins over an opponent who finished above 500. And then it becomes, how does the CFP compare them against any or all of those SEC teams with 2 losses but victories over top 10 teams on their resumes? Indiana could only play the conference schedule they were given. Another reason why they need to have more conference games. And they did what they needed to do by winning 5 of their first 6 conference games by at least 2 touchdowns. Their narrow 20-15 escape against Michigan prior to their bye this past week was the first game that didn't have a double-digit margin of victory, and the closest the Hoosiers have come to a loss. In theory, they could lose to the Buckeyes and still have a good case to make the 12-team CFP field. They'd need to keep it close, but if that's how Saturday plays out, they would have the same case as number 4 Penn State, who's also 9-1 overall and 6-1 in the Big Ten, like the Buckeyes. Penn State has no signature wins, but a respectable showing in their biggest game of the season against an arguably superior team, both in terms of roster talent as well as resume. If Indiana, who last faced a top 5 opponent way back in the 1968 Rose Bowl, where they lost to number 4 USC, gets run out of Columbus, then the SEC media industrial complex will unleash a full-on cover zero blitz on why the Hoosiers, despite having only one loss, do not deserve to even be in the field over one of their 2 lost teams. For Ohio State, who took care of business last week, beating Northwestern 31-7, Saturday's game will be their 3rd against an opponent ranked in the top 5 this season. They'll be the first team since LSU in 2011 and the 8th in AP poll history, which dates back to 1936, to play that many in the regular season. And they're 46th all-time, including bowl games and conference title games. Their record, 23-21-1 in those matchups. Only Oklahoma with 50 such matchups has more. As previously noted, they lost by 1 on the road at Oregon, 32-31, then won by 7 at home against Penn State in their lowest scoring game of the season, 20-13. If they beat the Hoosiers, who they've beaten a Big Ten record 29 consecutive times since the aforementioned 1988 loss, they'll have the inside track to be the Ducks' opponent in the Big Ten title game. If they close the season by beating the opponent they refer to as that team up north, I refer to them as the Michigan Wolverines, then the first Big Ten title game of the expanded conference era would likely have the teams ranked number 1 and number 2 in both the AP and CFP polls. Right now, the Big Ten's top 4 teams have just 2 losses between them. But because of the SEC's depth and because the Big Ten is ridiculously top-heavy, those top 4 teams have very little margin for error. 7-3 Illinois at number 25 is the only other team ranked in the latest top 25 polls, while the SEC has 4 in the top 10 and 8 in the top 25 of both the latest AP and CFP polls. Add in non-conference schedules with no Power 4 opponents, and things could get dicey for the team that loses in Columbus on Saturday. I think Ohio State makes the 12-team CFP field either way, though a loss to Indiana makes beating the defending national champs in the game over Thanksgiving weekend even more imperative than it usually is. And while I can't see the committee leaving a one-loss team out of the field, they do seem to be more focused on how many losses a team has as opposed to how those losses happened. This is Indiana's chance to remove all doubt on their worthiness to be one of the 12. Games like this is why we love college football.
Yeah, and I think one thing it's actually that I will defend the committee on, this is uncharted territory for them in terms of the eye test. And unfortunately, like I said, you can't always justify putting a 2-loss SEC team over an undefeated Big Ten team. That's almost impossible to do, especially because, again, you're only dealt the games that you have on your schedule, and you can't do anything else besides that. Okay. So I'm going to go into a game that's actually going to take place the week after on November 30th. And this is a rivalry game, but it's a rivalry game that hasn't happened in 13 years. And these teams have played 118 times. And the last time these 2 teams played in 2011, Justin Tucker was in college kicking the game-winning field goal for Texas to beat Texas A&M. Texas A&M and Texas. Texas is the team we mentioned before as the number 3 team in the CFP. They would be the 2 seed if they ended up playing, if that bracket was already made. They had a good season, like I said. Lack of quality wins. Here would be that quality win going to College Station and taking care of business. Now, Quentin Ewers got injured early in the season, but still 21 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. He's going to be at least a 2,500-yard passer for the amount of games that he's played. That's pretty good. This team has been offensively challenged at times. They only scored a grand total of 20 points when they played Arkansas this past week. Again, one of those legendary 5-5 teams I had mentioned before in this show. And again, Texas just needs victories to make themselves look better. They're not going to miss the college football playoff. I don't think there's pretty much any way that'll happen, even if they just lose this game and nothing else. but they want to get to the SEC championship and possibly get that prove-it victory to make them look like a believable number 2 team, or if everything breaks out, number 1 team going into the CFP. Now, Texas A&M, who is currently 15th in the CFP, they need this win more than anything in the world. Even though they are 5-1 in conference, 8-2 overall, they have a loss against Notre Dame early in the season. They have a bad loss against South Carolina, although South Carolina is looking like a team that should be in the playoff right now, in my opinion, losing them 44-20. Outside of that, a lot of victories, most of them at home against teams like LSU and Ole Miss. Texas A&M has been looking better. They've always been looking in that area of being good to possibly great. Marcel Reed is the quarterback who's having a pretty good season, and as usual, in the spirit of some of the better offensive players that they have, Levon Moss has rushed for 10 touchdowns for this team. Having a game in College Station like this is going to be great. Seeing a Lone Star showdown that has roots in its history of a rivalry that started in 1894 is going to be much better. There are just so many memories in this rivalry that ended when A&M went to the SEC. They never got a chance to actually get this back together. Now they will. And this is going to be a lot of fun seeing the Lone Star State battle for the first time in ages.
It's going to be interesting because the sole reason A&M left the Big 12 was because they were tired of playing Texas. They were pissed when the Longhorns joined the SEC because they knew it meant they'd have to play them again.
They were pressured right away, and they're playing them in the last week of the season. So we'll see what happens. But A&M does not want to be anybody's little brother, and we'll see how that happens. College basketball is where we're going now. Little math for you. 5 times 5 is 25. 35 minus 10 is 25. 50 divided by 2 is 25. Yeah, I know you don't care about that math at 25. We do care about the top 25 in college basketball. And even though it's very likely, I would say 100% likely, that the teams will be very different from the first top 25 that was released before the season in October to the one we'll see March before Conference Championship Week, we can still talk about those T25 teams that have caught our eye in month number 1. Jayhawk, your ball.
Rock chalk, baby. Whenever Bill Self has had a center as the focal point of his offense, he knows he has to surround that player with shooters to kick out to when the inevitable double teams come. He also knows that he needs depth behind his starting 5 to survive not just the brutal Big 12 conference schedule, but the NCAA tournament as well. When healthy last season, the Kansas Jayhawks were one of the best teams in the country, led by All-American center Hunter Dickinson, who averaged a double-double, scoring 17.89 points per game and a Big 12 leading 10.9 rebounds. He had all Big 12 forward Kevin McCullough Jr. on one wing. He led the conference in scoring at 18.3 points per game. He had point guard DeJuan Harris, who averaged 6.5 assists and made the All-Big 12 first team on defense, running the point. And Swiss Army knife forward KJ Adams, who averaged 12.6 points, 4.6 boards, 3.1 assists, and led the conference with a 60.1 field goal percentage at the 4. But by season's end, neither Dickinson nor McCullough were healthy, and that, coupled with the Jayhawks' lack of three-point shooting, Johnny Furphy was the designated sniper, but he was erratic, and while he wound up shooting 35.2% from beyond the arc, he didn't supply much in the way of volume. Averaged just 3.8 attempts per game from downtown. Once he finally became the starter, those attempts went up to 4.6, but his three-point percentage stayed the same at around 35.4. And with no other Jayhawks shooting better from the floor and any type of volume beyond the arc, Kansas as a team averaged just 17.3 threes per game and shot just 33.2%. Add that to a rotation that was really only 7 deep, with Harrison, Dickinson, Adams, and McCullough all averaging more than 32 minutes per game, and it finally caught up with the Jayhawks in the NCAAs, where they were unceremoniously bounced by Gonzaga in the second round, 89-68. Self knew that both of these things, the depth and the three-point shooting, needed to change, with Furphy going to the NBA, Nick Timberlake out of eligibility, and now Marco Jackson out for the year with a knee injury. Now, especially with Dickinson, along with Harrison and Adams returning to Lawrence for another season. So he brought in 3 of the top 100 transfers. 6'5" junior guard Rylan Griffin from Alabama, who shot 39.2 from 3 on 5.3 attempts per game as a starter on one of last season's Final Four teams. 6'6" junior guard AJ Storr from Wisconsin, who led the Badgers in scoring at 18.6 points per game. And 6'3" senior guard Zeke Mayo, who averaged 18.8 points, 5.7 boards, 3.5 dimes, shot 39% from 3 on 6.7 attempts per game, and was the Summit League Player of the Year at South Dakota State. Then he added 5'11" senior guard David Coit, who averaged 20.8 points per game at Northern Illinois, and he hit 175 threes in his 2 seasons with the Huskies. Now, it is early. Season's only 5 games old, and the Jayhawks are undefeated and ranked number 1 in the latest AP poll and have wins over number 9 UNC by 3 points and Big Ten Blue Blood Michigan State by 8 points, but they were in danger of giving the game away in the second half of each. So 1-loss record aside, their performance doesn't actually scream number 1 team in the nation, and it won't until the new arrivals make an impact, which so far they haven't, not consistently anyway. Storr was the preseason favorite to be Robin to Dickinson's Batman, but he has struggled the most. In the 2 games, he scored at least 13 points. He shot 13 of 22 from the floor. That's 59.1%. But in the 3 where he was held to single digits, he shot 6 for 17 from the floor, 35.3%. At Wisconsin, he was allowed to be a ball stopper and take hard shots, but that won't fly in Lawrence, where Self preaches what San Antonio Spurs legendary coach Greg Popovich calls 5-point basketball, where a player has about a half a second to make a decision with the ball. It's an adjustment for players coming to Kansas from places where they were the number 1 scoring option and having to accept that Self's scheme revolves around Dickinson as the focal point. So a shot you would have taken at your previous stop is no longer the number 1 option. Here, the offense's first look is Dickinson in the post, but when the shots aren't consistently falling from the other spots on the floor, which is what's happened so far this season, he becomes the Jayhawks security blanket. But having everyone looking to get him the ball at every opportunity does take away some aggressiveness from perimeter players who are used to being bucket getters. As Harris, the 5th-year senior, said regarding the adjustment the new guys have to make, quote, new people really don't get what coach wants until like January, end of December or so. It's going to take time. Now, Mayo got off to a hot start, 40 points in his first 2 games, 19 against Howard and 21 against UNC. Shot 47.1% from 3 on 8.5 attempts per game, but he's gone as cold as a Lawrence winter in the last 3, averaging just 7.7 per game, shooting 1 for 12 from downtown. Griffin has shot well from 3 so far, tick under 41% on 4.4 attempts per game in just 21.6 minutes. That works out to 8.1 attempts over 40 minutes. But he's yet to have a breakout offensive performance. Coit has been practically invisible, coming off the bench in the last 3 after starting the first 2. He shot just 39% overall from the floor. His 3-point shooting has been decent despite lack of minutes. Per 40 minutes, he averages 6 attempts from downtown and knocks them down at a tick under 43%. But like the others, he really hasn't had a breakout game or found any consistency. The challenge, according to Self, is to get his transfer guards to start reacting instead of thinking, so things aren't as Dickinson-centric as they've been through the first 5 games. Self would actually prefer it that way, saying, quote, that's not how we practiced at all. We haven't practiced on trying to get Hunter the ball. We practice on playing 4 around 1, playing him on the perimeter a ton, and utilizing him to help space the floor, end quote. But until those guards acclimate and their shots start going down consistently, Dickinson's post-up, he had 19 against the Spartans and is averaging 8.3 per game so far, will continue to be more than just the first option in the Jayhawks half-court offense. Up next, another game against a blue blood program as Kansas takes on number 12 Duke in the 2024 Vegas Showdown next Tuesday.
Very interesting. Wish they were going to this is one of the first weeks that they're not actually going to Maui at this week of the season. They're actually staying in land. That might help them out. Anthony, who you got?
Well, I got excuse me. I got Gonzaga as my top 25 team to look out for. And I keep this in mind. The Bulldogs has kind of been the model of consistency as far as college basketball. 25 consecutive NCAA tournament appearances, 9 consecutive Sweet 16 appearances. They've had 5 Elite 8 appearances, 2 Final Fours, and they've appealed to they've made it to the national championship game twice. That after 27 NCAA tournament wins in 2015. One problem: 0 national titles to speak for all of that, which has
Yep.
been the biggest bugaboo for this program. Now, this is a team that returns 6 of the top 7 players from last year's Sweet 16 team with the addition of 2 transfers. Michael Ajayi, a Pepperdine transfer who led the West Coast Conference in scoring, and Caleb Battle, a transfer from Arkansas, who was the Razorbacks' second leading scorer. That gives them a deep team that, as Baylor found out a couple of weeks ago in a one-on-one 63 spanking, that this team is deep and has a lot of scoring options, and this is also a team that's averaging 93 points a game while scoring 100 points twice in the first 5 games. All wins, by the way. Look at the backcourt. Ryan Nembhard, whose brother Andrew Nembhard, if you're a Knicks fan, you remember,
Mm-hmm.
plays for the Indiana Pacers. Has started the season with a 40-5 assist to turnover ratio, which is pretty much unheard of when you think
Yep.
about a point guard taking care of the basketball. Noah Hickman is the senior shooting guard that rounds up the backcourt. The front court, Graham Ike and Brandon Huff, gives them some size and power, size and scoring the inside. Ike has actually led the team in scoring in 2 of the 5 victories so far this season. And when you look at the additions that Ajayi brings to the table, Gonzaga's weakness last year was 3-point shooting. Ajayi shot 47% from 3 last season at Pepperdine. Battle gives them a 36% shooting mark from outside for his career. Battle in that Baylor game hit 3-pointers, the second 3-pointers in a 66-second span. This is a team that pretty much is a team that was that made the Sweet 16, and with the 2 additions addresses 2 very key weaknesses that kind of were caught up to last year. Wilson's outside shooting and some kind of a inside scoring presence. So this is a deep team that, I mean, if you're a Bulldogs fan, you wonder if you can finally get over the hump and get that national championship game. We'll find out, because the Bulldogs are always in the conversation as far as one of those 4 buys going into the NCAA tournament. But here's a key game, though. I was looking at this schedule. December 14th. If there was a litmus test game you want if you're a Bulldogs, how about playing the national champion UConn Huskies on national television a week before Christmas in prime time? So that is a game that you're going to circle. Look, beating Baylor, the breaks on Baylor was great. Dominated Long Beach and San Diego State. These are games you're supposed to win when you have this talented of a roster. But the defending national champs coming into play, it's going to be a measure stick of just how good the Bulldogs can be, and just what the Bulldogs are going to be come February and March when the tournament selection committee starts to kind of conjure and start figuring out the tournament bracket.
Yeah, and what's going to be interesting, Anthony, is that you can actually turn around and pick the Bulldogs as a top 25 team to watch next year, because it'll be their first year in the Big 12. And how will they do when they finally are in a brutal conference and have to go through that gauntlet? Then we'll have a real sense of how good of a coach Mark Few is.
I think he's still a very good coach regardless of whatever he does in the Big 12 because of the consistency. Spoiler alert, by the way, I will be at the Garden where that game will take place on December 14th for Gonzaga and UConn. So 3 versus 2, not too bad. You guys have been talking about models of consistency. I'm going to take you off the beaten path and go to a team that has never been known for a model of consistency in either college basketball or college football, and that is Rutgers. Now, why am I talking about Rutgers? They haven't really played anybody yet. They've almost played everybody local, but Mamaroneck, you have the St. Peter's in there, you have Monmouth, but they're going to be prime showing all year. Now, no team has ever made the Final Four with freshmen as its top 2 scorers since Kentucky in 2014. Shout out to James Young and former Nick Julius Randle, by the way.
Mm.
And Duke is going to be a team that's going to try to stop that this season with Cooper Flag and Con Knuppel. But I don't want to talk about Duke because you can't make me. So I'm going to talk about Rutgers, the team that actually has a lot of stuff, that has a lot of interesting stuff, as they have the two-headed freshman monster known as Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. Bailey is a son of former college basketball players. Dylan Harper is the son of Ron Harper. So you know there's a basketball quote, their blood, and Flag, Harper, and Bailey, as of right now, I know we don't look at it too much, are the three best prospects looking to possibly go pro in draft boards coming this year. Yes, Rutgers has the second and third best prospect in basketball for the pros. What worlds are we living in? The two players have done very well so far. They're only ranked number 24 in the nation. They still have a big time Big Ten schedule coming, but they combined for 37 points, 18 rebounds, and 7 assists just last night in a win over Merrimack, 74-63. Both of these guys have great possession after possession offensive powerhouses, and if Cooper Flag ever has a misstep, Ace Bailey is going to be the number one pick of this draft. He has skills that are comparable to some of the better college basketball players we've ever seen out there. That one season that Kevin Durant had in Texas. Don't think you're going to see too much over here, but you see a lot of that in this guy. T-Mac, by the way, is my real comparison to him. Bailey just knows how to be on the floor and how to score. 2 games so far, missed the first 2. He had 20 points and 8 rebounds. Harper, 19.5 points, 5.5 rebounds, 4.3 assists, 31 minutes a game. He's played all 4 so far. Steve Peichel, former Stony Brook head coach, nice little Long Island boy, doing good, has never had this much talent in his entire life, and I don't think he'll ever have this much talent in his entire life while still coaching in the local area that he does right now. We never said that Rutgers could be a model of interest and consistency in men's college basketball, by the way. Shout out to C. Vivian Stringer. But this is going to be a fun team to watch, whether they play the Merrimack, Michigan, or the high school team that's around the corner. Rutgers is going to be a team that you're going to want to watch all season. And I can't believe I'm ever saying that in any connotation of college basketball, college football, or anything else. All right. Finally, we move on to the world of those players who either get paid very handsomely due to NIL or get paid semi-handsomely also due to NIL. Some of these have made the grade as November ends, and starting with Jay, we're going to highlight 3 of these athletes. Go ahead.
Yeah, my guy, Cooper Flag, power forward out of Duke. The 6'9" Maine native was the number 1 ranked recruit in this year's freshman class, so he's easily the captain obvious choice here and has to be talked about. So it makes sense for On the Sports Line's resident ACC guy to weigh in on the player that Brendan Marks, who covers UNC and Duke basketball for The Athletic, believes is legitimately the best high schooler he's ever seen. And Jon Scheyer's willingness to let Jeremy Roach and other multiple former 5-star recruits leave Durham this offseason just to better maximize the fit around Flag for the 9 months the presumptive number 1 pick in the 2025 NBA draft is on campus would seem to indicate that the Duke head coach agrees with Marks on that. The expectations were high to begin with for Flag, but after his performance this summer at the Team USA camp, where despite being the lone collegiate representative on the select team, he was often the best player on the court, going against the guys who were on the gold medal winning team. Believe it or not, but so far through the first 4 games, the Blue Devils are 3-1 with a 5-point loss to Kentucky as their only blemish. More on that in a sec. Flag has actually been better on the defensive end, though he has shown a tendency to gamble, than he's been on the offensive end, though he has given us glimpses of his abilities as a scorer. He had the first stinker, scoring-wise, of his Duke career, just 8 points on 3 of 8 from the floor, 2 of 3 from 3, 1 of 1 from the line, in 28 minutes in Duke's most recent game, an 86-35 win over Wofford, so it didn't hurt them. But he did stuff the rest of the stat sheet: 9 boards, 6 assists, 3 steals, 2 blocks. In the 3 games prior, Flag averaged 19 points a game on 45.5% from the floor, 23.1% on threes on 4.3 attempts per game. 77.8% on from the charity stripe at 6 attempts there per game, with 9.7 boards, 3.3 assists, 1.7 steals, and 1.7 blocks, highlighted by a 26.12 rebound effort in that loss to Kentucky. Flag had the ball in his hands twice in the final 26 and a half seconds with a chance to win it, but turned it over on both possessions, the second coming with 5.5 seconds left, effectively sealing the defeat for the Blue Devils. But while those turnovers by Flag were the hot take, it's patently unfair and incorrect to lay the entire blame for the loss at his feet. John Shire was right to put the ball in Flag's hands at the end of the game with the score tied, but after setting 12 ball screens for the freshman forward during the game prior to that point, which made sense as Kentucky was switching on everything. So, you want to try and get the ball to Flag in the middle of the floor, set ball screens, and try and create a mismatch he could exploit. It was a little surprising that on the final play that Shire not only didn't call a ball screen action, but he also didn't even call a play that involved a pass of any kind to set Flag up. Kid was left on an island, on an ISO island, and asked to basically bang his head against the Wildcats defense and win the game. Not sure I'd ask a 17-year-old to do that completely on his own, even one as talented as Cooper Flag. He can't be the only option for Duke in the final 10 minutes of a game. Duke is a young team, but a very talented team, and once they all get on the same page, they're going to be dangerous, and it pains a UNC guy to say that. But until they get there, they'll rely on Flag, one of only 6 freshmen leading his team in scoring, and also ranking in the top 50 of all high major players in defensive rebounding. The last freshman who came in with this much anticipation for what everyone believes will be a one-and-done season was Anthony Davis in 2011-2012. All he did in his 9 months at Kentucky was average 14.2 points per game, 10.4 boards, 1.3 assists, and lead the SEC in field goal percentage to 62.3%, and the entire nation in blocks at 4.7 per game, win the AP Player of the Year, the Wooden and Naismith Player of the Year awards, basically every SEC award available, and he led the Wildcats to a national title, putting up one of the most dominant defensive games ever, grabbing 16 boards, dishing 5 dimes, along with 3 steals and 6 blocks. Duke is hoping for something like that from Cooper Flag, with the entire college basketball world watching and dissecting every game he plays. His next chance will come next Tuesday on a neutral court in Las Vegas against number 1 Kansas. No pressure, kid.
By the way, Zion Williamson says hello to the most exciting college basketball player coming in. You can't give two Duke people credit in the same segment, which I completely understand. No. By the way, which I'll take it. You're allowed. Anyway, Anthony, go ahead with your player to watch.
Yeah, my player to watch is Braden Smith of Purdue, and Smith, Big Ten preseason player of the year. Also, unanimous selection of 10-person preseason All Big Ten team. He's coming off a record-breaking season for Purdue, setting school and Big Ten records with 292 assists, being the only player in America to average at least 12 points, 7.5 assists, and 5 rebounds per game. Just the second player in NCAA history to amass at least 450 points, 275 assists, and 225 rebounds in a season. For his career, Smith has 808 points, 445 assists, and 373 rebounds in just 74 games. He's one of 6 players to even eclipse that mark of 800 points, 400 assists, and 350 rebounds. When you join the company of Magic Johnson and you Kenny Anderson and John Morant, you're doing something pretty well. By the way, he's also the second player, Boilermaker in the last few years to be Big Ten preseason player of the year. Zach Edey is the other one, and he's taking his talent to the NBA. Playing, he's actually rising up. John Morant's teammate in Memphis. But so far this season, he's averaging 15 points a game, 6 rebounds, 9.5 assists on 40% field goal shooting. Against Alabama, number 2 ranked Alabama, he has 17 and 10 and became the first player in at least 25 years to have at least 17 points, 10 assists, and 6 rebounds against the top 2 opponent. 22, 9, and 6 against Yale. Also, against Texas A&M Corpus Christi, 15 assists, the most ever in a season opening game against for Purdue. Vanessa Buzzsaw called Marquette defense in his last game. Held to 11 points, struggled shooting the ball. Yeah. I mean, Marquette's defense is on another level. But right now, the way he's doing, he's definitely gonna leave his mark on the program. Our former Purdue star Robbie Humble saying he's gonna go down as one of the best, as arguably the greatest point guard in the history of the school. Right now, he's the leader and he's the go-to guy. And for a Boilermakers team that was in the national championship game a year ago, just last season, it'll be interesting to see how far Smith can carry this team. I mean, Edie was kind of the guy that gave him the inside outside presence. It's going to be a little different when you're seeing the guard kind of leading the way this time around.
Well, I mean, college basketball has always been guard centric, Anthony. So this will be, while it'll be a change, in terms of what people have become accustomed to in the Zach Edey era, it's essentially putting Purdue back to where most of college basketball lives anyway, which is driven by guards, and Braden Smith's one of the better ones.
And now, by the way, ironically enough, the only person who we picked, because I have the Big East preseason player of the year that I'm talking about, the only person who didn't pick a preseason player, conference player of the year is Jay, because RJ Davis has the cachet and the resume to be the preseason player of the year.
I picked a preseason freshman of the year instead. Cut me a little slack. I'm talking about a Blue Devil here.
I'm just saying though, just because Cooper Flag is going to be the most watched person out there. I'm not giving you. It's just because that's how talented the ACC is, how there's stuff. But we were talking before about how Purdue has become guard centric and not relying on a big white guy to make baskets in the paint. I'm going to go back to that big white guy making baskets in the paint and going with Creighton and the preseason Big East player of the year, Ryan Kalkbrenner. Very rare do you see a guy in these days stay at their school for 5 years and become a senior trying to lead their team on, but that's what Kalkbrenner has done. And his numbers are great. He is the three-time defensive player of the year. His scoring has just gone up every single year. From a 13-point player a game in 21-22 to 15.9 to 17.3 to right now an average of 25.8 points per game, including a ridiculous opener of 49 points in their first game against UT Rio Grande Valley. By the way, I don't care who the opponent is. You score 49 points in any college basketball game, you're 100%. You're good. He went 20 and 22 shooting, 11 rebounds, 3 blocked shots, 2 away from what would have been the school record of 51 set back in 1967. Then later that week, he just went 9 for 10 shooting and scored 24 points. That week, by the way, where he was named AP National Player of the Week in week 1 of college basketball, he averaged 36.5 points on 90.6% shooting. That's 29 to 32. Ryan Kalkbrenner is a guy who is going to be a stat sheet stuffer all year for Creighton because, again, he is leading a very talented team right now, the number 14 team in the nation and a team that made the Sweet 16 a year ago. And he is leading Creighton back. He's scored 16 points and 14 points in his games last week. But again, doesn't really need to do much. Those games were won by 35 points and 23 points respectively. You don't need to know the opponents. It was Houston Christian and a team from Kansas City themselves.
Cupcakes.
So cupcakes even in the college basketball world in that sense. But Kalkbrenner, who has, again, played some big games out there, is about the schedule. It does write itself sometimes in college basketball. And oh boy, will it for Creighton, literally starting now. They play in-state rival Nebraska, who made the tournament last year, tomorrow, actually. San Diego State on Tuesday, Texas A&M ranked 23rd on Wednesday. And then to start off December, Kansas, UNLV, and Alabama. And then you get into the Big East schedule where Creighton, again, is going to be one of the top teams. And we see that the Big East, is loaded again, starting with UConn, with Creighton, with St. John's, despite tonight, and everything else. This is going to be one hell of a Big East this season, and Kalkbrenner is going to be the best player in it because he has the most experience, he has the best defensive skills, and if you score 49 points in the game, you have the best offensive skills too.
I don't know. Mr. Jones over at Marquette might have a thing or two to say about that.
That was the most impressive performance, by the way, I've seen from any college basketball team this year. How Marquette boat raced Purdue last night. It wasn't even a contest. Marquette always is just like, you're like, okay, Marquette's a little bit of a threat. And then you watch them, I'm like, oh shit.
Yeah,
that's
they're a lot of a threat.
They're very much of a threat. All right, guys, go in peace and eat those drumsticks. For Jay Kaplan, Anthony Strait, for Jay Kaplan and Anthony Strait, I am merely the Ocean Spray Cranberry canned sauce on your Thanksgiving Day table, Stephen Rabinowitz. I like it, so don't judge. You want this damn thing on demand? YouTube.com/OnTheSportsLines. You want it live? Facebook.com/OnTheSportsLines. And on that platform that is about to be passed by Blue Sky J.
Our Twitter handle is at ONTH Sportslines, where you'll find a link to each new show like tonight's, along with tidbits and nuggets from the world of sports that we think are worth your time to check out. This week, there's a link to a great piece by The Athletic's Chantel Jennings on Gino Auriemma, UConn's legendary women's basketball coach, who this week passed Tara Vanderveer as college basketball's all-time winningest coach, notching win number 1,217 in the Huskies' 85-41 victory over Fairleigh Dickinson. But it was having 63 of his former players on hand for the occasion and their tributes to him in the celebration afterwards, especially the one from Diana Taurasi, that really touched Auriemma. The video clip of Taurasi is worth the watch, and the story is worth the read.
I just want to mention two things before I go, both NBA related, because we have a small bit of time that I wanted to mention it real quick. Shout out to the Inside the NBA crew, which we will see now in 2025 and beyond, as they have signed a licensing deal with ESPN to basically be their main pregame show. So that's going to be very wild. And shout out to Hubie Brown, who we learned today will be broadcasting his last college basketball game as color commentator this year. One of the best voices that I've ever heard out there.
Ever.
The days with Dick Stockton, the days with even Al Michaels, the times that he was there, and with Mike Green. So shout out to one of my favorite basketball, even at 91. He still knows more and sounds more coherent than a lot of the other basketball minds right now at ESPN that you'll ever know. So
amen.
Shout out to all of those.
Yeah. And can we take a minute of silence for the impending end of what was one of the better content shows for ESPN for the last almost 20 odd years? Around the Horn is ending this summer, guys.
24, 25 years, mentioned it earlier in our that little rant that I did. So.
Yep. Their original host was an old buddy of mine. You may know him, Max Kellerman.
All right, guys, we're gonna head out now. We'll see you next time on the Sports Lines. Good night.
Happy Thanksgiving,
everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.